Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we witnessed the stunning performances of Primordial White Testarossa and Primordial Yellow Carrera, along with the complete annihilation of Twilight Valentine, who had long been a source of chaos in the world. In this episode, Rimuru will finally return, effortlessly neutralizing Milim's unstoppable attack, Drago Nova, and saving the world at the most critical moment. So, let's get started. Feldway was in a state of restless. The curse he had placed upon Veldora had been unexpectedly destroyed. In stark contrast, Diablo's face was lit up with a smug grin. Never one to miss an opportunity to provoke Feldway, Diablo deliberately inquired why he looked so tense. The more Feldway demanded that he shut up, the more Diablo intensified his taunts. Diablo even went so far as to arrogantly declare that it seemed like all of Feldway's cards had been laid bare, his schemes had crumbled, and ultimate victory now belonged to their side. However, in reality, Diablo's body had already been battered beyond recognition, and it was painfully obvious that Feldway had yet to unleash his full power. Moreover, the presence of Evarage could not be ignored. So while things had not unfolded as Feldway had planned, Diablo's declaration of victory was a brazen exaggeration, given how precarious their current situation was. Yet, maintaining psychological dominance could provide a crucial edge in battle. Diablo adhered to this principle, carefully orchestrating a strategy to bring down Feldway. It was all part of the plan. As expected, Feldway's aura shifted. He admitted that Diablo had succeeded in provoking him. Up until now, most of Feldway's energy had been dedicated to maintaining control over Milim, which had in turn affected his ability to battle Diablo at full strength. However, as long as he kept Milim under control, ultimate victory was inevitable. Milim was invincible. Sooner or later, she would wipe out all opposition and destroy the divine tree. Logically, Feldway knew this. Yet, despite understanding it rationally, the overwhelming desire to crush Diablo and shut him up completely gnawed at him. He wanted to show Diablo the full extent of his power. However, releasing his hold on Milim, even for an instant, would cause his strength to drop significantly. For the ever-cautious Feldway, this was an enormous risk. Yet, even so, he was convinced that he would not lose. Diablo's infuriating psychological tactics had done their job. Feldway's mindset had shifted, from a pragmatic, results-driven approach to the pursuit of absolute victory through sheer force. He poured all his focus into issuing a final command to Milim: destroy the divine tree. With that, Regalia Dominion lost its hold over her. Milim would remain in her stampede state, continuing to execute Feldway's last command. Feldway calculated that all he had to do was wait until she had eliminated any obstacles, then seize the right moment to reclaim control. At this point, stopping her was impossible. She would execute the command immediately. The divine tree would be annihilated. The world was on the brink of destruction. Feldway could feel his defensive power plummeting and braced himself accordingly. Yet Diablo only smiled slyly, showing no intention of attacking, his gaze instead shifting to something else entirely. Now let's turn our focus to Yuki. At that very moment, Yuki was utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. The ever-domineering Chloe was bossing him around with relentless orders, completely ignoring his complaints as she issued one command after another, dictating every move he made. In contrast, Veldora stood nearby, nodding approvingly, seeming to take immense satisfaction in the fact that someone else was finally sharing his suffering. That smug look on his face only irritated Yuki further, leaving him questioning how he had ended up in this ridiculous situation. The moment Yuki had demonstrated his ability to use instant motion, Chloe had instantly taken note, wasting no time in making full use of the skill's advantages. The results spoke for themselves. In combat, Yuki could evade nearly any attack, so long as his opponent's level wasn't overwhelmingly beyond his own. By expanding his magical perception to a radius of about 100 meters, and reacting the instant an attack was detected, Yuki could even dodge light-speed strikes with instant motion. As a result, he effortlessly avoided Milim's surprise assaults, her ferocious strikes grazing past him, any one of which would have been fatal, yet failing to land. Had Milim been in her right mind, the sheer disparity in their strength would have made it impossible for Yuki to keep up. But with her lost in berserk madness, this weakness became an exploitable advantage. Yuki's role was simply a bait. His job was to draw Milim's attention and prevent her from unleashing wide-area attacks. More importantly, this strategy served another critical function: it prevented Milim from continuing to grow stronger. Veldora's repeated missteps had already triggered Milim's ultimate skill, Lord of Wrath, activating Magicule Breeder Reactor and allowing her power to spiral upward uncontrollably. But now that Yuki was the one engaging her, there was no longer any risk of her being pushed further beyond her limits. Yuki, with his unparalleled intellect, fully understood the reason behind his role. It was simply because he posed no real threat to Milim but could infinitely employ evasive maneuvers. However, there was someone even more frustrated than Yuki, Manas Maria. She continuously ridiculed him, calling his performance disgraceful and lamenting how pathetic it was to be so blatantly underestimated. Yuki, of course, found this insufferable, but what truly annoyed him was Manas Maria. Their compatibility was downright abysmal. Modeled after Maribel's personality, Manas Maria boasted top-tier performance, yet she would seize upon Yuki's every minor mistake, berating him relentlessly. Even when he made no errors, she still found ways to mock him with cold, sarcastic remarks, just as she was doing now. Yuki resolved to find a way to mute Manas Maria for good. At that moment, his thoughts drifted to Rimuru. He was absolutely certain that his return to Central World had been secretly orchestrated by Rimuru. After all, encountering Mai Furuki in the boundless dimensional rift was an impossibility. Following that line of reasoning, it was entirely plausible that his unfortunate entanglement with Manas Maria was yet another one of Rimuru's pranks. Yuki grumbled that, aside from Rimuru, there was no one in existence who could deal with the rampaging stampede Milim. Chloe, ever the strategist, replied coolly that if he truly understood the situation, he should stop complaining and focus on buying time. Yuki dared not disobey Chloe's orders. Even Veldora, full of enthusiasm, declared that he, too, would contribute, only to be immediately reprimanded by Chloe, who ordered him not to act recklessly. Veldora fell silent at once, unwilling to defy Chloe's command. Naturally, it was Chloe who dictated the battlefield, issuing precise instructions to keep Milim from advancing toward the divine tree. Yuki, knowing better than to hesitate, asked Chloe for his next move. She instructed him to use his proudest supernatural ability to attack Milim and divert her attention. Yuki immediately caught on to something odd: how Chloe knew about his secret skill. That was impossible. The two of them had never even met before. Though Yuki was aware that Chloe's true identity was one of the students from Freedom Academy, the person standing before him now felt like someone entirely different. Chloe, irritated, told him there was no time for explanations and ordered him to get moving. Yuki sighed, setting aside his questions and obeying her command. Moments later, he heard Chloe muttering softly, almost as if in pleasant surprise. He glanced at her, but her face remained impassive, as though he had imagined it. Then, the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. Feldway issued his final command to Milim to destroy the divine tree. At that moment, Milim's gaze locked onto its target. Yuki's heart pounded in alarm as he launched an attack at her, but she didn't even flinch, not even acknowledging him. His assault was as meaningless as an insect bite. Even Veldora, wielding Dragon Claw, found his strikes effortlessly repelled. Milim remained unfazed, her stance shifting into the form necessary to unleash Drago Nova. Yes, just before unleashing Drago Nova, Milim would generate a thin layer of star particles, forming a translucent membrane that shimmered with a pale blue-white light. Every one of Veldora's attacks was reflected without effect. He was completely unable to break through the barrier. Even Storm Dragon Veldora, one of the strongest beings in existence, had exhausted every possible effort, and still found himself helpless. And yet, giving up meant the destruction of the world. At this moment, only one thought consumed Veldora. Perhaps his only option was to fully utilize Lord of Chaos and its power of probability manipulation, hoping to alter Drago Nova's trajectory. Deep down, he had an inkling that fertile paradox could potentially interfere with star particles. At worst, even if he suffered severe injuries, he might at least be able to weaken Drago Nova's devastating impact. He called out to Yuki for assistance in calculating the coordinates. But then, he noticed something peculiar. The ever-assertive, ever-calculating Chloe, the one who had been relentlessly directing their movements, had gone completely silent. For a moment, Veldora wondered if she had given up. But no, that didn't seem right. Chloe had taken position directly in front of the divine tree, staring intently at Milim. That was the precise location where Drago Nova would strike. Standing there was no different from suicide. Regardless, Veldora had to regroup with her first. He and Yuki teleported to Chloe's side via instant motion. And then they saw it, Milim, standing at the ready, about to unleash Drago Nova. Between her hands, star particles crackled and shimmered, an apocalyptic force coiling like a cosmic nebula, a destructive power beyond the comprehension of this world. This energy, continuously compressed to an impossibly high density, held enough raw force to obliterate an entire galaxy. Milim, long devoid of rational thought, had reached a level where the power she was about to unleash was over 100 times stronger than what she had used against Zelenus. Veldora finally understood, this was a power that he could never counteract. Though he wasn't ready to concede defeat, surrender seemed like the only option. This was going to be the single greatest act of destruction ever recorded in the history of Central World. Even this divinely protected, unbreakable world, Central World, the realm shielded from ruin, was about to be shattered beyond repair. And accompanying it all was Feldway's unrestrained laughter. As if responding to his amusement, Milim released Drago Nova. The end had arrived. The blazing, electrified light surged forward, a radiant blue-white beam roaring through the heavens at near light speed, searing the atmosphere as it streaked toward the divine tree, toward Chloe, Veldora, and Yuki. And yet, no one truly despaired. Every warrior stood their ground, filled with the resolve to fight until their very last breath, embracing the fleeting moments before destruction. And then, they witnessed a miracle. At that instant, the air trembled, as if something had suddenly appeared. Silvery white hair, shimmering like moonlight, danced in the wind, drawing everyone's gaze. The frozen flow of time resumed, and all was as it had been. Yes, the divine tree remained untouched. Alongside this revelation came Rimuru's relaxed yet exasperated sigh, complaining about the pain. As if she had anticipated this moment all along, Chloe wasted no time rushing toward that ever-reliable figure, embracing him tightly. She had not given up, she had merely positioned herself at the fastest possible spot to cling onto Rimuru. For Rimuru, returning to Central World only to immediately face Stampede Milim was something he had mentally prepared for. However, being thrown directly into the line of fire at the precise moment Drago Nova was unleashed, that had been entirely unforeseen. And yet Ciel had the audacity to boast about Time Warp's ability to let them choose any time and place. Rimuru had trusted her without a second thought, and now, here he was. Irritated, he called out Ciel's name in frustration, demanding an explanation, but she coolly maintained that this was the perfect timing. Rimuru scoffed, arguing that if perfection were the goal, surely returning before Drago Nova was fired would have made far more sense. At the very least, he wouldn't have had to suffer such excruciating pain. Not to mention, the best course of action would have been to isolate that destructive energy into imaginary space. So why had Ciel insisted on neutralizing it head-on? However, Ciel remained as composed as ever, declaring that the most optimal response was one that resolved the crisis without causing any collateral damage. And at that moment, Rimuru understood. Ciel's so-called perfect timing had been intentional. She had deliberately let him take a direct hit from Drago Nova. For a brief moment, Ciel remained silent. Then, as if nothing had happened, she simply stated that the matter was already over and that he should focus on moving forward. Clearly, this had been her true objective all along, to acquire Milim's star particles. Though exasperated, Rimuru found himself strangely reassured. This wasn't the first time Ciel had played pranks on him. And seeing her act as she always did, he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity, a reminder that he had truly returned to this world. Well, at least Rimuru made it back safely, Rimuru thought to himself, attempting to console his own irritation. It was then that Rimuru noticed Chloe still clinging to him, now a breathtakingly beautiful woman. Of course, she quickly explained her reason for leaving the labyrinth and arriving on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the little dragon Gaia continued to call out to Milim, its cries filled with desperation. According to Ciel, Gaia's persistent calls had weakened Milim's controlled state, and now, with Drago Nova released, Feldway's Regalia Dominion was rapidly losing its influence. If this trend continued, Milim might soon regain her senses. Rimuru absent-mindedly patted Chloe's head as he processed this information. Then, realizing that she was no longer a child, he quickly withdrew his hand and apologized. To his surprise, Chloe pouted and asked for more praise. Just as Rimuru hesitated, unsure of how to respond, Ciel chimed in with a deadpan remark. This kind behavior qualified as sexual harassment. It was only then that Rimuru finally noticed Leon, who was glaring at him with clear disapproval. Before the situation could escalate further, Veldora barged in, wrapping an arm tightly around Rimuru's shoulders and boasting about how hard he had worked alongside Chloe in his absence. Naturally, he also demanded a reward. And to be fair, Veldora had played a crucial role. He had successfully quelled the Gruel's rebellion and saved Luminous, Xian, and the others from certain doom. In recognition of his efforts, Rimuru decided to reward him with a brand new MMORPG equipment set, freshly developed in the labyrinth. As everyone reveled in the joy of their reunion, another figure appeared, Yuki. But unlike the others, Yuki was seething. He declared, in an almost broken voice, that he was at his absolute limit. Rimuru had saddled him with the most insufferable, ill-tempered companion in existence. Rimuru blinked in confusion, having no idea what Yuki was talking about. But Yuki, too agitated to care, launched into a furious tirade, not even waiting for Rimuru to listen. He even used thought communication to rant incessantly, lamenting how Maribel's consciousness had taken up residence inside his own mind. After listening to the whole ordeal, Rimuru had to admit, yeah, that does sound annoying. But at the same time, he saw no real reason to help Yuki. After all, he wasn't responsible for this mess. Besides, manas were extraordinarily rare abilities. Normally, one would beg to obtain one. The wisest course of action would be to form a cooperative relationship, as he had done with Ciel. And as far as Rimuru was concerned, manas couldn't be forcibly separated from their host in the first place. Ciel, of course, agreed immediately, affirming that manas and their hosts must never be separated. Chloe, too, interjected, stating that she had completely fused with her former manas, Chronoa. Before Rimuru could even process this, Ciel added that she would always be with Rimuru-sama and that he needn't worry about fusion. Rimuru, feeling reassured, simply remarked that having a reliable partner was the best feeling. And just like that, he dismissed Yuki's complaints entirely. Honestly, Yuki totally deserved this kind of suffering. But back to the real problem at hand. The priority now was to restrain Milim and restore her consciousness. However, before Rimuru could even breathe a sigh of relief, Milim crashed headfirst into his chest, slamming into him with full force. Even with pain nullification, this sheer impact was something he couldn't ignore. If this kept up, he would be subjected to an endless barrage of headbutts. This wasn't a sustainable strategy. Perhaps shifting into his slime form and wrapping around her would be a better solution. Just as Rimuru was about to act, a frustrated voice rang out. It was Feldway, grumbling in utter exasperation. He was completely falling apart. He could not stand the way Rimuru so casually carried himself, as if he had already secured victory. Though Milim had yet to regain her full consciousness, Rimuru genuinely wasn't worried. They would win for sure, but the real question was, where do they define victory? Ciel, in her usual manner, made a pointed remark, chiding Rimuru for setting the bar for victory far too low. True victory, Ciel asserted, should be nothing less than absolute perfection. Rimuru declared that their victory was inevitable. Stirring the flames, Rimuru, too, had a knack for provocation. These words sounded eerily similar to what Diablo had just said, and now, Diablo was practically euphoric, cheering with fervor as his signature as expected of Rimuru-sama echoed once again. However, Rimuru sharply noticed Diablo's body beginning to collapse. Though Diablo maintained his usual composed expression, the severity of his injuries had already reached a point where he could vanish at any moment. Ciel explained that while Diablo had become proficient in wielding the power of imaginary supply, his physical body simply couldn't withstand it. Furthermore, he couldn't regenerate using magicule-based recovery, making his complete disintegration merely a matter of time. Diablo, however, remained utterly indifferent, casually remarking that it was a shame to lose the body, but he would eventually resurrect and return to continue serving Rimuru-sama. Rimuru felt both exasperated and impressed. Diablo was willing to sacrifice himself just to keep fighting Feldway, but as his leader, Rimuru had to do something to help. Ciel suggested giving Diablo a portion of Rimuru-sama's slime cells. Naturally, when Rimuru bestowed them upon Zijin, he hadn't hesitated in the slightest. But if he gave them to Diablo, he could already picture the excessive gratitude and relentless praise Diablo would shower him with. It was exhausting just thinking about it. Yet, seeing Diablo's body on the verge of collapse, Rimuru couldn't bear to ignore it. And so, disguising a piece of his own body cells as a recovery potion, Rimuru tossed it to Diablo, even using instant motion to ensure Feldway couldn't snatch it away. Of course, there was no interference, and Diablo successfully caught the potion. Overcome with emotion, Diablo vowed to treasure it as a family heirloom. Rimuru was completely speechless. He immediately ordered Diablo to drink it at once. And besides, a demon talking about family heirlooms. The very concept was absurd. Diablo was undeniably capable, but his thought process was utterly incomprehensible, giving Rimuru a headache. However, the moment Diablo drank the potion, his body completely recovered, as if the damage had never existed. Though Diablo claimed to fear no one, Rimuru had a feeling he was quite wary of Sue. After all, Sue had been planning to inspect Diablo's room, and the only reason the investigation had been delayed was due to the sudden outbreak of war. Rimuru was curious to see how Diablo would handle Sue's scrutiny. After all, he himself had his own secret arrangement with Rain. Money was no issue for Rimuru, so if necessary, he could simply construct an impenetrable secret base to evade Sue's investigations. In the end, Diablo was a subordinate he could truly rely on. Whether it was dealing with Feldway openly or maneuvering against Sue in the shadows, Diablo would undoubtedly serve as an invaluable reference. As Rimuru pondered this, he speculated that Diablo would likely engage in a prolonged battle with Feldway, buying time for him to free Milim. However, Ciel voiced a different opinion. Rimuru was caught off guard. Diablo may have healed, but that didn't mean he had the strength to defeat Feldway, who had left him in such a battered state. Ciel clarified that Diablo's injuries had nothing to do with Feldway. They were entirely self-inflicted. Rimuru was stunned. Wanting to motivate him, Rimuru offered praise, declaring that, for now, Diablo was his only hope. Unexpectedly, this encouragement had too much of an effect. Diablo's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, his entire demeanor radiating newfound determination, as if he had just received the highest honor in existence. With that settled, Rimuru turned his full attention to Milim, focusing on putting an end to her rampage and restoring her to normal. Alright, that's all for this video. There's no doubt that Ciel's chosen timing for Rimuru's return was deliberate. Her goal was clearly to obtain and analyze Milim's star particles. These particles are unique to Drago Nova and Milim, deeply connected to the Star King Dragon's dragon factor. Perhaps an analysis of the star particles will lead to an unexpected revelation in Volume 23. Another crucial point to note, Veldora noticed that his paradox fertile seemed capable of interfering with star particles. Though it was just a passing remark, the implications are huge. This could mean that Storm Dragon holds an as yet unrevealed critical role. In our next episode, Milim will finally return to normal, Diablo will drive away Feldway, but the looming threat of Evarage remains. Next time, we'll be covering the grand finale of TenSura Volume 22. Of course, the final episode will be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.